Hospitals never sleep, they just close their eyes and listen. The monitors breathe, the vents hum, and every hallway is a throat that swallows shoes. That night in London, Kentucky, the fourth floor smelled like lemon cleaner and warmed plastic, and the clock over the nurse station had decided seconds should drag their feet. I'd come in with an arrhythmia that made my chest feel like a washing machine with a spoon inside. Observation overnight, the ER doc said, which sounded like homework for somebody else. They put a telemetry box around my neck like a chaperone, threaded me with an IV, and parked me in 412B behind a curtain that forgot how to be a wall. I tried to sleep with one eye open and settled for sleeping with both eyes nervous. The TV muttered strangers' laughter. My roommate, an older man named Amos, who wore his hearing aids like earrings on the tray table, snored the way people snore when their lives have been forgiven. In the ceiling, the sprinkler head stared at us like polite threats. He introduced himself like an apology the hospital didn't want to make. "Night shift," he said, a gentle tenor you'd trust in a storm. "I'm the float. Call me Don." He leaned into the doorway and let the hall light halo him without trying. White shoes that never learned to squeak, scrubs the color of instructions, a badge on a retractable clip that flashed the hospital's seal, and the word orderly, the way a choir flashes a hymn number. His hair was tidy in the way men's hair gets tidy when they decide to start their lives over and make it stick this time. He had a face that knew where all the pens are, and a mouth that used sir like punctuation. "You a coffee person?" he asked me, as if coffee were something he could earn points for. "Not at midnight," I said. "Smart," he smiled. "Late caffeine steals from tomorrow." He stepped in, one hand on the rail, and looked me over like I was a shelf he wanted to dust. "How's your pain scale?" "I'm fine," I said, because fine is the word men say when they want to be admired for not complaining. He checked the pump without touching it, eyes doing the math of drips, fingers reciting a litany they didn't need to say out loud. He adjusted my pillow with a magician's practice. One lift, two thumps, a tuck under the shoulder that made me feel like a human package. He was careful with his hands, not cautious, careful, like someone who's practiced being seen doing the right amount. "You mind if I turn the lights down a hair?" he asked. Hall glare gives a man the kind of headache that forgets to leave in the morning. "Go ahead," I said, and he did it in a way that made the room more intimate without making it smaller. He looked at Amos, who snored, and then at me. He nodded. "I'll be around." He started to leave, then paused. "You from here?" "Corbin," I said. "Moved away. Came back. Long story." "Home is where people know your grocery list," he said, like a man who collected aphorisms and polished them when nobody was watching. "Hit your call if you need anything. I'll hear it before the station does." "With your ears?" I asked, half teasing. "With these," he said, tapping the side of his neck as if hearing were a full-body sport. He didn't feel like a stranger yet. He felt like the kind of competent you only notice when it leaves. The room exhaled when he did. I dozed. The telemetry box beeped in its own language. A floor machine sang to itself far away and then fell asleep in the middle of the hallway like a drunk uncle. Sometime after the weather forecast and before the infomercials, Don was back, an outline inside the door like a stamp pressed into wax. "Vitals," he said softly, not to wake Amos. He rolled the card in, cuffed me with a quiet that felt like good manners, checked my oxygen saturation with a finger clamp that glowed red like a tiny confessional. He hummed while he worked. Not a tune, exactly, more the idea of humming. He asked me to rate my pain again. He told me I looked like a man whose heart just wanted a reminder that it was invited. He laughed at his own metaphor, so I wouldn't have to. "You need anything else?" he said, turning down the corner of the blanket like he'd learned to do on a ward where nurses grade neatness. "What else is there?" I asked. He lifted a hand, tiny shrug. "Jell-O, pudding, ginger ale, breath mints for the prideful." "Pudding," I said, because the child in me still thinks food can keep night away. "Chocolate, if you can." "Chocolate is a sacrament," he agreed, and left on quiet shoes. He came back with a little cup that wore a foil hat and a spoon tucked under the lid's lip like a secret. He peeled the foil carefully and set it on the tray. The air near the spoon carried a smell I don't have a word for, only a memory. Workshop and battery and a penny on the tongue. I told myself it was the plastic, or the room, or my brain trying out a bad mood. Don looked at me the way men look at toddlers when they hand them something sweet and want to watch joy happen to them. "You eat," he said. I dipped the spoon, tasted chocolate that was chocolate but also not. Not bad. Just bright in a way food shouldn't be. I ate another spoonful to prove to myself that my senses were behaving. The room tilted a hair. My tongue remembered a word, almond, and then told me I didn't get to use it because not everybody can. "Good?" he asked. "It's hospital food," I said. "So yeah." He smiled with the corners. He watched me like a man timing a recipe. Then he turned, wrote something on the dry erase board under your care team, and I noticed the pen didn't squeal. He left the cup on the tray and patted the rail and told me to sleep while sleep was free. In my chest, the spoon stopped clanging around the washer, and the washer stopped pretending it was a boat. The telemetry echoed my body's new compromise. I felt suddenly so very calm, the kind of calm that makes a man want to promise someone something he can't keep. I dozed again. Or I fell into something that pretended to be sleep, but felt more like the bed had invited me to become furniture. A dream arrived with the efficiency of a scheduled train. Someone walked into my room and turned off a switch behind my left ear. The dream had Don's shoes in it, and the dream also had my mother, who lives in another county, leaning over me and saying, "We don't thank strangers for chores we didn't ask them to do." When I woke up, Don was in the chair by the window with his legs crossed like a patient man in a Sunday school. He had the chart folder open, but he wasn't reading. He was waiting. "How's your pain scale?" he asked. "I feel weird," I said. "Floaty." "It happens," he said. "Anxiety is a liar. Pudding helps." I looked at the cup. 2 spoonfuls missing. The spoon lay on the lid like a polite weapon. "You want water?" he said. He handed me a styrofoam cup with a straw. I sipped. The water tasted like water that was trying to be helpful and failing. My stomach sent a warning shot that was less nausea than not yet. I let my head fall back. "It's okay," he said. "This is the worst part. The body argues before it obeys." "Obeys what?" I asked, because words can make a person feel like they have a leash on the night. "Rest," he said. "People don't know how to rest. They think rest is just sleep. It's not. It's permission." He stood. A neat movement, the kind you learn when you get tired of people saying who taught you to get out of chairs like that, and took the trash with him. He looked at Amos, who continued to breathe like someone whose dreams don't need an audience, and at my monitor, which blinked an opinion I couldn't read. "I'll bring you ice chips," he said, which felt like a kindness and an assignment. I had the thought then that I would remember later as my first alarm. We included my body when my body hadn't voted. I hit the call button when he left. The chime did not sound like an emergency. It sounded like choreographed courtesy. A nurse named Riva came in with a smile she'd earned and a hair clip that said she had raised daughters through prom. She checked the bag on my pole and frowned at its label. "Flush?" she asked, almost to herself. "Who flushed you last?" "The night guy," I said. "Don." "Don who?" she said, pen over paper. "Float," I said. "He said he's the float." "There's 2 of them tonight," she said. "One new, one ours." She looked at the cup in the trash bag Don had already tied off, neat, and then back at me. "You okay?" "Floaty," I said, and the joke felt like a thing somebody else said. She took my vitals with a briskness that tried to teach my body a better rhythm. "Sugar," she murmured, then went quiet in a way that told me a number was not her favorite. She pulled a glucometer and snipped my finger with a lancet so fast my brain asked me if I'd been touched. The machine counted like it was teaching me patience. She said, and the had a good left hook. "You eat anything odd?" "Pudding," I said. "Chocolate." "You allergic to nuts?" she asked. "No." "You taste anything funny?" "Like a battery prayed over it," I said, and she looked at me for a second long enough to decide whether I meant it. "I'll be right back," she said, and her right back had urgency but not panic. She left with my trash bag like it was evidence and took my chart like it was a raft. 5 minutes later, enough time for a quiet conversation with a charge nurse, a glance at a Pyxis screen, a check-in with the one doctor who always answers his page, Riva returned with a different smile. This smile had steel in the gum line. "Hydration," she said, as if it were a gift. "Let's glance your IV." She traced the tubing from the bag to the pump to the port with a finger that had its own guardrail. She disconnected not the way a person takes something away, but the way a woman opens a window in a room where a man who is too polite has just left. "We're going to switch you to fresh fluids," she said, giving the word fresh the respect people usually reserve for newborns. "The doc wants to keep an eye on your electrolytes. Don't eat anything you didn't see me open." She smiled in a way that dared me to disobey and winked at Amos, who was dreaming about winning a county fair pie contest. Don didn't come back in for an hour. When he did, he had a white towel over his shoulder, like a waiter, and a cup of ice chips that shimmered like salvation. He stopped dead in the doorway and took in the tubing, the new bag, the label he hadn't written, the nurse's scrawl on the whiteboard where she'd added no outside food drink like it was a family rule. "Hey, partner," he said, the word partner held very carefully between teeth that wanted to be helpful. "How we doing?" "Resting," I said. "Good," he nodded. He set the ice within reach and reset the blanket corners that had obeyed my fidgeting. He did not mention the change in the line. He did not ask where his chocolate cup had gone. He did not look at the trash. He touched the telemetry box lightly with 2 fingers, the way a man blesses a child he has decided to like, and smiled. "Buzz, if you need me." When he left, I watched him through the door window as he paused at the nurse station. He didn't argue with Riva. He didn't even look at her. He looked at the night board, the one with the patient names and room numbers that's half dry erase and half absolution, and made a tidy mark next to 412B, like a man updating a shopping list. I slept like a person whose body had temporarily forgiven him for being uncooperative. When I woke, it was to a quiet that was a little too quiet. Amos wasn't snoring. The hall machine had finally found a janitor who loved it enough to turn it off. The vents were doing their work in a whisper, and Don was sitting again in the chair by the window, still as furniture. "You scared me," I said. "Sorry," he said, and the sorry was not for me. It was for the part of him that resented needing to speak at all. "Didn't want to wake you. I'm doing rounds." "At 3 a.m., I said. "Sleep obeys the obedient," he said, with the air of a man who thinks he's written something profound and is waiting for the rest of us to thank him. "How's your pain scale?" "I feel okay." I tried to push myself up on an elbow. My arm remembered it had a stake in the situation. He stood in one neat movement and put 2 fingers on my forearm. Not restraint, not exactly, more a reminder that gravity works. "Let me," he said, and raised the head of the bed with the remote as if he had been the one who invented electricity. "Where's Riva?" I asked, and he smiled in a way that told me the answer he had ready wasn't the one I wanted. "Busy," he said. "She's fussing over a post-op who thinks a doctor's apology is a treatment plan." He held the cup of ice out with the straw aimed at my mouth like a nurse would with a newborn's bottle. "Open," he said gently, and I did because my throat wanted the cold more than my pride wanted to coordinate my hands. The ice hit my tongue and my body clapped twice in approval and then sat down. He watched me swallow, and then he watched my face, the way people watch babies' faces for the moment after a bottle when you can see the food turn into a person again. His gaze was clinical, not unkind. He had a notebook in his lap, police blue, cheap, government store cheap, with log typed on the front in a font that had never had a good day. He wasn't writing, he was waiting to. "You keep records?" I asked, because if you can make a man tell you what he loves, he thinks you're seeing him and not measuring him. "Records keep me," he said. "You ever notice how hospitals get better when the right person keeps notes?" He didn't open the book. He just patted it, as if to let me know he had memorized the page for me already. "What's your job again?" I asked, because it is never rude to ask a man to say out loud the thing he thinks you're going to assume. "Orderly," he said, and the word pleased him so much I saw it move in his mouth like a peppermint. "Orderly," I repeated. "Like order." He grinned, slow. "We speak the same language." "What language is that?" "Rules," he said. "And mercy." "Mercy?" I asked. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, hands steepled in a way that would have embarrassed a pastor. "People suffer. Hard to watch. Harder for them to do it. Sometimes," he said, and he kept his voice so mild it might have been explaining weather. "Sometimes a person needs help making the decision their body is trying to make. The nurses don't like me saying that. Doctors pretend they weren't thinking it already. Families, they're the worst. They want time to mean something it doesn't. He didn't look at me like I was the person who should be listening. He looked past me, beyond the curtain, beyond the hall. He was talking to the room he lives in inside his head, the one where he's always right and the rest of us are the mess he's been hired to clean. Not everyone's ready, he continued. Some folks cling, can't stand the thought of leaving their troubles to other people. That's selfishness disguised as love. He sat back. But some people, you can tell, they're tired of arguing. He smiled, small. I like to help tired people. I'm not tired, I said. He nodded agreeably. No, you're not. He stood, picked up my chart, and laid the notebook on the blanket, just within my sightline. I could read the top line, 412B, male, arrhythmia, eats putting. Under that, bullet points I couldn't see unless I leaned so far I'd cease to be a person and become a question mark. Thirsty? He asked. No, I said. You sure? He asked, surprised, as if no were a word he doesn't hear often enough to remember its grammar. I want Reva, I said, and the sentence brought me more joy than it had any right to. He held my eyes for a beat and then looked at the door. She's busy, he said again. I'll wait, I said. He took a breath through his nose, a little flare, like a man smelling rain before he decides whether to forgive the weather. He closed the chart and set it down and picked up the notebook and the cup of ice. He collected the trash bag that didn't have his cup in it anymore, because Riva is a church that keeps its own secrets. He gave me a smile as neat as the corner of a folded hospital sheet. You're a polite one, he said, approving. I like a man who waits. He left me in that ridiculous quiet. I watched the clock decide to make minutes bigger. I watched the doorway like a dog. And then I did something I'm still a little ashamed of. I whispered, Mom, into a curtain because the body doesn't care how old a person is when night is dumb enough to knock twice. The next time he came, it was with a wheelchair and a tone that had decided to believe it was a favor. X-ray, he said. Portable's tied up. Quick trip. Get a picture. Come right back. Now, I said. Now, he said. Faster at this hour. Riva, I started. Nose, he said. I looked at the nurse call button. He looked at it too, like a man who recognizes a competing policy. Come on, he said. The tech is waiting. I like to help people keep their schedules. He unplugged my telemetry box with a competence that made me briefly grateful and then guilty for being grateful. He moved the pole with one hand and held the chair with the other, and I obeyed because he made the act of standing feel like I was doing him a kindness. Amos snored a suggestion that I should stay. The hall had that empty, midnight shine, the floor wax reflecting the notion of stars, the bulletin board at the station decorated with clipped flowers for a nurse's baby shower next week. Don left a note on the board without showing it to anyone. 4 to B, X-ray. He turned and smiled me into the elevator. The elevator offered up a mirror that made me look like a man who had agreed to something polite. Don watched the floor numbers the way gamblers watch dice, calm because they think they're owed. Ever been lost in a hospital? He asked conversationally, like he was warming up his mouth for something that wanted to be kind. I try not to get lost where they keep the needles, I said. He laughed. You'd be surprised how many people go wandering. People think everything with permission is safer than it is. The doors opened onto a hallway that didn't look like radiology. It looked like services, linen, housekeeping, the place where carts sleep. He rolled me anyway, left, then right, then a left that wasn't labeled. Shortcut, he said, and smiled at a camera I couldn't see but he could. He parked me in a small alcove where a drink machine glowed with all the drinks nobody should have when the heart is tired. Wait here, he said. I'll go get the tech. He left me. I sat. The soda machine asked if I wanted to confess. I heard a cart's small squeak, then a door murmur, then silence. 5 minutes went by in a flavor I don't want to taste again. 10. I reached instinctively for my phone and remembered it lay on the tray table in 412B, like a baby monitor I had fake forgotten. I stood, because my body decided no is a verb that prefers action, and then the elevator doors at the end of the hall opened with a chime that sounded surprised to be helpful. 2 nurses I had never seen pushed a bed and a story I didn't belong in. One looked at me the way people look at dogs that have walked themselves out of their fences. "You lost?" she said, not unkind. "X-ray," I said, pointing back the way I'd come. "That's the other way," she said. "Who brought you?" "Dawn," I said. She frowned. The other nurse made the face of a person who has new information and doesn't like it. "Which Dawn?" she said. "Float," I said. "He's the float." "We don't have a float named Dawn tonight," she said quietly. She put a hand on my IV pole like it was a leash and the other on my elbow the way Riva does, the way women do, care disguised as choreography. "Let's get you back." We rounded the corner, and Dawn appeared with a smile so good I almost forgave him for being a person. "There you are," he said to me, like I'd been the one taking too long. To the nurses, he offered a nod any church deacon would recognize. "Thank you," he said. Portable just opened up. I was about to save him the walk. The nurse with the elbow didn't let go. She looked at his badge the way cats look at visitors. She smiled the way you do at a man in a church parking lot whose casserole dish you're not letting him take home right now. "We'll bring him," she said. For the first time I saw it, the extra breath, the small calculation his face did when a woman didn't obey the script. He rearranged himself back to pleasant. "Appreciate it," he said, and turned the other way as if more important tasks awaited his competence. He was gone by the time I looked back. The X-ray tech did not ask why I looked like I'd nearly been politely escorted into a room that didn't exist. He took the picture. He said hold and breathe and done, and moved around me with professional disinterest and a kindness I later wished I had written down so I could send it to someone's mother. The nurses brought me back to 412B and plugged me back into my good monitor. Riva was waiting with a story in her eyes. "You okay?" she said. "I don't know," I said. She nodded. "Okay, here's what we're going to do," and she used "we" the right way. "You're going to nap with your call in your hand. If anyone offers you anything you didn't order, you say Riva said no. If anyone tries to take you for a walk and it isn't me, you ask them to sign your board so I know their name and go say hi." "What if they don't sign?" I asked. "They will," she said, and her certainty had Sunday morning in it. I slept just enough for a dream to try to sell me a lie. In the dream, Don stood at the end of my bed reading aloud from a list of people who were tired. The list had names and dates and doses. He told me he had a gift for deciding. He told me God liked tidy. He told me my heart was a paper bag full of bees and someone had to tell the bees to go home. When I woke, the room had changed flavors. The hall smelled like coffee and a broken morning. The window kept the night like a secret it didn't want to share. Don's chair was empty. Rava's clip clacked somewhere near the station. The chart at the foot of my bed had new handwriting. I was thirsty, the honest kind. I drank the water Rava had opened and watched the light make lines on the blanket. I pretended to be someone whose night had been normal. At shift change, a day nurse with a voice like a blessing brought in happiness disguised as a tray. Eggs nobody asked to be that yellow, toast that snapped when you looked at it, and coffee that smelled like a compromise. "Doctor's coming in too," she said. "We'll talk discharge." Don was not on days. Someone else reset the whiteboard. Someone else laughed at Amos's joke about postnasal drip being a sin. The clock paced itself. I thought about going home and teaching my apartment how to be a room again. Rounds came with their clipboards and their language. The doctor shook my hand and told me the word benign as if it had chosen to sit on my chest and be a pet. He said follow up, water, sleep, and less caffeine, and I promised to consider being a person who could keep those promises. He left, and the day nurse unplugged me from the box and liberally used the word soon. I signed. I dressed. I folded the gown like I owed the hospital an apology for using it. I sat on the edge of the bed where my life had tried to split and waited for the wheelchair that would take me to the automatic doors and the afternoon and the part where a mountain route would carry me home if I begged nicely. Don came instead. "Need a hand with checkout?" he asked, bright as the coffee warming plate. He had a visitor badge clipped over his retractable. The retractable sagged like a tell. "Transport's backed up." "I'm good," I said. "Let me," he said. Riva appeared in the doorway like the parting of a good Red Sea. "I've got him," she said. He smiled with his mouth and regretted me with his eyes. You do, he said to her, and it was almost a compliment. He stepped back as if the hall had reminded him of something he'd forgotten to be humble about. In the elevator down, Riva said, "Do you know the smell of almonds?" I nodded. "Some folks don't smell it," she said. "Some do. Some think they do when they don't." She looked at me. "If you smelled something you don't like last night, believe yourself anyway." "How?" I asked. "Am I supposed to know who to believe?" "You," she said, firmly enough that I wanted to name a child after her. "Believe you, and whatever woman in the room is saying the same thing out loud." At the lobby level, she walked me out into the controlled avalanche of discharge. Families with balloons, nurses who have learned to accept gratitude, a volunteer with a piano that sounded like forgiveness if you squinted. We stopped near the doors. Riva tucked the discharge papers into the envelope like she was sending me through the postal service and wanted me to arrive unsullied. "Wait," she said. I waited. She looked over my shoulder. He was there, of course, Don, by the auxiliary coffee kiosk, stirring something into a cup with a wooden stick, as if the cup had wronged him, and he had decided to forgive it publicly. He caught Riva looking and raised his cup in a toast neither of us agreed to. "Please don't come back," Riva said to me, as a way of saying live. "I don't plan to," I said. "Good." She squeezed my shoulder, the kind of pressure that reminds a person they have bones. "And if anyone who knows your name says I can fix your sleep, slam a door and call me." "How?" I said, half laughing, half learning. "Do I slam a door in a hospital?" She smiled. "You be rude," she said. "Rude as a door." I went home in the back seat of my cousin's car, while my cousin narrated his opinion of the football season as if the cardiology unit were listening. The hills were a color you name when you have kids to explain things to. My apartment smelled like a room that had given up on me in my absence and decided to grow old without me. I lay on my couch and breathed loud enough for myself to believe I was still here. That night, my phone buzzed once at 11:47. Unknown caller. I let it talk to the air. It didn't leave a message. The next day, at the grocery store, a man in scrubs stood in front of the pudding cups and read labels with an intensity that made me decide to buy fruit instead. The weekend started on a Wednesday and ended when I stopped waiting for something to knock. I told no one about the taste, battery and almond, because the words made a sentence that felt like inviting the night back in to see if it left anything. But every morning I woke, I told myself I smelled coffee first. I told myself I heard my own breath. I told myself I believed me. A week later, my neighbor, a VA nurse, texted me a link with the words, "Did you see this?" and 10 exclamation points that read like an attack. I clicked. The headline said, "Orderly arrested," and the photo was a mugshot of a man whose hair had obeyed him until this point and had finally decided to leave. The article said Cincinnati and VA and poison and suspected in multiple and Kentucky and questioned in deaths dating back years. It did not say pudding. It did not say mercy. It did not say don't eat anything you didn't see her open. It didn't have to. My tongue remembered enough for all of us. You'd think the story would end there. The headline, the picture, the sensation of having dodged a very tidy bullet. It didn't. The night is a collector. It keeps receipts. 2 weeks after the arrest, a detective from a county I didn't know existed called to ask if I had time for a few questions. He sounded tired in an official way, the way men sound when their job is talking to people who used to be asleep. I said no before I said yes. We arranged a meeting at a station with carpet, so knew it sounded like sneaking. He wore a tie that had been tied too tightly on an earlier day and now refused even reasonable requests. He shook my hand like it was the first time anyone had offered him one without asking for a favor. "We're building a timeline," he said, and I thought of Don's little book. "We have records," he said, and I thought of Riva's eyebrows. "We have questions about food," he said, and I chose to look at the window and not at the photographs in the file he kept closed with a reverence he didn't extend to lifesavers. "Tell me about the night," he asked, and I told him about the cup. I told him about the smell. You're supposed to be able to smell only if your family tree is kind to you. I told him about the float persona and the X-ray transfer that wasn't. I told him about Riva and the trash bag and the numbers that spoke I didn't say the word that had started living behind my teeth like a wasp. the word that the paper would later staple under the photographs like a caption, Angel. I let him put words down for me where I didn't want to see mine. He wrote in block letters like a man who wants to be understood by the kind of person who will look for loopholes later. Did he introduce himself as Don? The detective asked, like the first knock in a bad dream. Yes, I said. Last name? None, I said. Describe him, he said, and while I did, his pen made the shape of tidy without ever writing the letters. He thanked me the way men thank witnesses when they'd like to turn them into evidence. He walked me to the door and told me to call if I remembered anything else, and the way he rounded off the else made me want to hand him a bag full of almond and battery and mercy. On the way out, a bulletin board by the exit kept a company of photocopied faces and tips lines and case numbers that look like phone numbers wearing armor. I'm ashamed to say I was grateful not to see mine. Grateful that my face didn't have to sit among the pictures that tell other women to walk faster to their cars. People ask me if there was a moment, one, when I became certain that I had been a project and not just a patient whose paranoia earned itself a headline to point at. There were several. One was when I unlocked my door and discovered a business card tucked into the jamb like a polite thumbprint. Follow-up courtesy check, facilities, with a number that, when I called it, produced a fax tone that sounded like a scream with a broken back. Another was when I woke at 3:14 a.m. to the sound of my hallway neighbors fumbling a key they never fumble and found my thoughts at the door before I was. And another was when a nurse friend told me, in a voice that had had to learn too much, that pudding was a vector because it is sweet enough to convince your mouth it loves you. But the moment that made me call Riva and leave a 3-minute voicemail that is 90 seconds of breathing was this. I went to the pharmacy to pick up my beta blocker, and the pharmacist, a woman with hair the color of someplace better and a name tag that claimed Karen, like a rescue mission, asked me to wait while she printed my med sheet. She slid it across the counter with the concern of a person who has found a neighbor's dog and wants to teach it her name. The sheet listed my meds and the hospitals. Under administered, someone had entered PRN anxiolytic sedatives withheld by nurse. And in the notes, a scribble I'd recognize as much by tempo as by shape. T rest better after intervention, DH. The initials lay there like they belonged to anyone. I brought it to the detective. He looked at it like a stain you need to apologize for. He said the word chain, as in of custody, and the word records, as in sealed, and the word subpoena, as in will try. He said thank you as if gratitude were part of the toolkit, not a thing given. You want to know about the interaction. You use that word in your messages to me like you think my life is a lab where people in coats look at me through glass and take notes. Fine. Here. This is what it was like, when it was just me and Don, and the part of the night you can't ask anyone else to show up for. He was not a shadow. He did not drip menace. He brought pillows the way other men bring flowers. He asked where I went to school and pretended to recognize a teacher's name I made up. He said he had a mother who couldn't rest and a grandmother who took her medicine on time, and that it made him sad to see what people make other people endure because they prefer stories with bows. He laughed when he should. He listened when he had to. He complimented the order I kept by my bed, phone, book, charger, water, as if he were appraising a workbench. He stood in a way that suggested he spent most of his days watching people and learning which way to move so they would think he had saved them from the part of themselves that wouldn't obey. He never said mercy killing. He never said cyanide or insulin or dose. He said rest and quiet, and I'll keep an eye. He had a way of repositioning a cup so that it touched your fingers, and in the same motion, repositioning your sense of who was in charge of this minute. He offered to pray in a way that suggested he had wrestled God into a chair and made him sit still. He said, I don't like to see you hurt, as if he had a plan that would make that sentence true. And I made noise. Not at first. At first I made please and thank you, because I was raised by people who write those words on the backs of checks. Then I made no with a laugh in it, then no with a cough under it, then no with a hint of my father in it, and finally no like a lever pulled, like a fire alarm, like a horn. And when no was a law, he did not break it. Not because he believes in laws, because he believes in neatness. He likes quiet endings. That night, the hallway had more witnesses than he'd budgeted, and witnesses are messy. He left me an IOU that said later. The police saw to the part that meant never. When I heard the word confession, it didn't land the way you want it to. You want a thing like that to feel like a stone dropping into a pool where you can finally stop treading and let yourself float. It doesn't. It feels like discovering that the stone was not the bottom. It feels like realizing people have been throwing stones for years and the shore keeps moving away. He told them numbers, some too large to fit in a newspaper column, some small enough to hurt more for the specificity. He told them how in a way that made the why sound like a minor character. He asked for pleas and bargains and transfers the way men ask for salt at tables in houses they've been invited into. He wrote letters in a hand that had practiced making guilt look polite. He set a number in Ohio and another in Kentucky and Cincinnati, like a radio station that thinks geography is for other people. He put Marymount and VA and Drake in his mouth and turned them into a collection. He held the word angel long enough to make it weird. He tried to build an altar to mercy out of creamers and syringes and soft hands. He almost made you think help could be a weapon that looks a lot like a blanket. You want more interaction? This is where my therapist will lean across the table and ask me if telling you this will make me feel better or just make you listen closer. I'm going to tell you anyway, because you asked. Because the whole point of this series is to pick up nights like rocks and show you what lives underneath and say this will try to climb you if you let it. When he leaned in to raise my bed, his fingers were cool and dry. Wash, rinse, repeat all shift. When he laughed, he did it with all the air, not just his throat, like a man who likes to practice emotion without paying for it. When he stared at the board, he stared as if names were things he could put on shelves. When Reva took away his cup, his jaw did a small thing you could miss if you blinked. He swallowed nothing. When he stood at my door and lost a second before he regained it, the second had a sound. It was the sound of control, finding out witnesses have teeth. He meant to be tidy with me. He meant to be God with me. He meant to be the last face on my night. He tells the police now that he meant to be kind. But in the part of the night where men are only what they do, his kindness looked like turning down lights and lifting cups and saying we and moving chairs and making notes. The only reason I am saying any of this out loud is because Reva exists and because I believed me when my tongue tried to tell me battery. If there's a useful part to take into daylight, it's this. Choose rude when polite is trying to press you into the shape of a patient who will accept mercy they didn't ask for. Ring the call. Make the nurse scold you for being anxious. Ask the tech to say their name while looking at their badge. Ask to see the label on the bag. Say who ordered that, and make who turn into someone who can spell their own last name twice without looking at their hands. I keep a bracelet in my junk drawer now, the hospital kind they cut off with scissors when you leave, the kind with my name in all caps that made me feel like a person even when I was just a bed number. I keep it because it reminds me that leaving is a skill, not an accident. He died in prison years later, not the kind of death that convinces anyone to believe in math again. People argued about how to count him. People prefer numbers to names. People like to rank monsters like baseball cards, their eyes flicking to the stats because the faces are too loud. Kentucky says he's ours, and Ohio says he's ours. And the Commonwealth and the state trade stories like recipes. And the only people who get to make the conversation end are the ones who sit in kitchens remembering battery and almond and mercy and deciding to teach their kids the word rude as a blessing. If you hear orderly, think order. If you hear float, think shapeshifter. If you smell almond, remember that not every nose was invited to that party, and your body might be telling the truth in a different scent. If you have a Reva, thank God with your mouth. If you don't, be your own. When I walk into a hospital now, for blood work or visiting, or to sit in a lobby with a coffee while a friend has a surgery that will make us have to learn a new way to talk about bravery, I watch for hands that move too gently. I watch for cups that find me without asking. I watch for voices that turn we into a leash, I bring my own water. I watch the board for names that write down notes in a hand with too much pride. I count my breaths the way you count a child's when you're waiting for them to steady. I tell myself this sentence as a liturgy before I sleep in hospital sheets. Believe yourself. And if you can't, borrow Reva's eyebrows. I owe her more than a thank you. I owe her every breath that didn't get a. We pressed onto it by a man who likes projects. I go by sometimes, and we stand by the coffee machine that nobody trusts, and we talk about rule breaking as a medical intervention. She laughs and tells me I'm ridiculous. I watch the hallway and think the world might be smaller if we could teach every nurse to write no outside food drink with the same disdain she wrote it with that night. Do I hate him? People ask that. I don't know. Hate is noisy. I prefer something quieter and more durable. I prefer policy. I prefer doors. I prefer no said the way a man would say, hand me that wrench, expecting compliance. I prefer to wake in the night and smell coffee and not battery. I prefer to watch the clock and believe it will stay in its lane. I prefer to think of myself as a person with a drawer full of bracelets and cup lids and ribbons and a small pair of scissors I use on nothing that breathes. How did I survive? I listened to a part of me that didn't need words. I let rude be a key. I borrowed a nurse's we and gave it back with interest. I treated mercy like a thing that asks permission. He wanted to be the last sentence in a lot of stories. He is not the last sentence in mine. How am I doing now? Well, I keep my hospital bracelet in the junk drawer. I ask to see every label before anything touches me, and I believe myself first. Killer reveal Donald Harvey. The Angel of Death, Donald Harvey, 1952 to 2017, was a hospital orderly active in Ohio and Kentucky from the 1970s through the mid-1980s. He cultivated a calm, capable persona while murdering patients, primarily through covert means, at facilities including Marymount Hospital, London KY, Cincinnati VA Medical Center, and Drake Hospital. Arrested in 1987, Harvey eventually confessed to dozens of killings. He pleaded guilty to multiple counts in Ohio and Kentucky, receiving numerous life sentences. His methods often involved tampering with food, drink, and medical lines while maintaining the appearance of a helpful caregiver, a pattern that allowed him to operate for years before colleagues' suspicions and lab anomalies led to investigation. Harvey was killed in prison in 2017. His case remains one of the most chilling examples of a predator exploiting the trust and routine of healthcare settings.